and probably like the general population of Colorado, I went to bed at halftime thinking we were going to win, and I just woke up sad.
I'm J.R. Smith. I'm also a senior, and I'm not a Broncos fan, so I'll do this, please.
Get out.
I'm Grayson.
Bye.
My name is Grayson Abel. I'm also a senior, and I unfortunately did not watch the game.
We won't hold it again.
No.
We were working on our presentation.
Yeah. Good answer.
And doing other homework, that's really important, you know, all these AP classes. Also, though, there must have been another reason. The question is, the Declaration of Independence has been described as the most revolutionary political statement in American history. What new ideals about government and its purposes are set forth in the Declaration, and why might they be considered revolutionary? What principles expressed in the Declaration are traceable to John Locke and other natural rights philosophers? And why do you think the Declaration is one of the most imitated or copied documents in the world today?
With due respect to Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence presents no new ideas about government, as its main points stem from natural rights philosophers such as John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Cicero. However, the Declaration is still revolutionary because of the universality of its ideals and the impact it has had on oppressed groups wishing to revolt.
The idea of equality in the Declaration of Independence, in which it is written, all men are created equal, is traceable to Cicero, a Roman natural rights philosopher, in his The Republic and the Laws, where he states, "We are born for justice, and what is justice based not on opinion, but on nature."
The Declaration emphasizes that certain unalienable rights of man include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is derived from John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, where he writes about a man's natural right to life, liberty, and property.
According to the Declaration, governments are instituted among men to secure these natural rights. But this too is traceable not merely from John Locke, but also Thomas Hobbes, who wrote in the Leviathan that, "Where there is no law, there is no power. Where no common power, no injustice." Hobbes realized that without governments, there is no protection of natural rights, as people use brute force and treachery to claim what they want.
Despite its ideas having been discussed previously, the Declaration of Independence is nevertheless revolutionary because it is the first time when a group of people completely disbanded from their current ruling body of government and formed a separate one. Although previous documents such as the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights directly challenged the ruling body, those documents merely reformed the then existing government, while the Declaration of Independence completely abolished its legitimacy in the colonies.
The Declaration is also revolutionary because its ideals are as applicable today as ever before. The Declaration provides that if a government fails to protect the rights of its citizens, the people have a right to abolish it. This was applied in the recent revolt in Egypt. In 1981, Hosni Mubarak declared a state of emergency to combat Islamic terrorism, which resulted in a loss of basic rights for the Egyptian people, such as the right to vote or to speak freely. Just as the Declaration provides that it is the right of the people to alter and abolish an oppressive government, one of the revolutionary Egyptian Tahrir documents states that we must also throw his laws, which have repressed us for 30 long years, into the trash.
The revolutionary aspects of the Declaration of Independence are also exemplified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The UDHR was a product of World War II and was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. Numerous authors contributed to this document, such as Eleanor Roosevelt, who proclaimed that this will be an event similar to the Declaration of Independence. Like the Declaration of Independence, the UDHR emphasizes that all human beings are born free and equal and have the right to life, liberty, and security of persons, thus applying the ideals of the Declaration of Independence to an international stage today.
The Declaration is also revolutionary because its principles are still being sought after and fought for. On the 60th anniversary of the UDHR, Chinese dissident Liu Xiaobo wrote Charter 8, which condemned the current Chinese government and demanded human rights for the Chinese people. Mr. Liu observed, "The Chinese people now include many who see clearly that freedom, equality, and human rights are basic values of humankind, and that democracy and constitutional governments are the fundamental framework for protecting these values." The Declaration remains revolutionary because brave men and women are still fighting for its ideals over 200 years after it was signed. We are now ready for your questions.
Sure. To whom is the Declaration of Independence addressed, and why do you think the drafters were attentive to opinions of mankind?
The Declaration of Independence was, on the surface, addressed to the King of England to just give a basic summary of the reasons that they are separating. But it had a significantly more deeper message than that, because it had to approach the idea of why people should agree that America has the right to secede from the British rule, and the reasons that contributed to that opinion.
Other countries at this point had a low view of us as a country, as we were not even a country yet, we were still colonies. So we wanted really just to verify to the countries in the world, especially in Western Europe, that we are legitimate now. We mean to make this statement. Here are our reasons why we are revolting. In other countries such as France relied on our American Revolution, although France's revolution was much more violent and wild than ours was. They used our declaration as a guiding point for their revolution after ours.
Talking about mankind, and they felt mankind needed to be listened to. In our government now, do you feel mankind is being listened to like at that time, or is it better or worse?
In our government today, I feel like mankind is being listened to a lot more, just because as we are more modern in our views, more politically correct in our views, we are incorporating more people to that spectrum that is all men are created equal. I believe that when the framers wrote the Declaration, they at first meant it to be all white landowning men. However, they left that open because Thomas Jefferson said that America is going to be a really flexible, developing country. So they left that open, so we could interpret that with accordance to our time.
It's also worth noting that as time has progressed and as information has become more easily accessible, elections have become much more based on the direct vote of the people. As over time, the senators have been directly elected by the people instead of the state legislators as they were originally.
The equality presented in the Declaration also allows people, like Grayson said, to practice direct democracy and in referendums and cases like those. The equality that the Declaration of Independence gave us allows us to be more present in our government than we were before.
With respect to you, are we being represented? That is an issue right here in Colorado with the northern Colorado, the secession that the 11 counties are now considering, which I don't believe this is actually going to happen. But what has happened is the state legislature in Colorado, no offense, sir, has promoted bills, renewable energy bills that provide that you can only have a certain amount of energy and electricity coming through your county that is non-renewable, which hurts these 11 counties as their whole economy is based on gas and oil production. So they feel that as there are 11 small counties in northern Colorado, their voice is not being heard in the state legislature. That's why they're entertaining the idea of seceding and forming the state of northern Colorado.
None taken.
Do we have time for a second question? Okay. The Declaration of Independence is often called American Scripture. Is this an apt description? Why or why not?
That's actually an interesting question because I believe that it's become...
Thank you.
It was a very interesting transition from the Declaration to the Articles to the Constitution, because the Declaration was not, like, in the original Constitution, was not exactly American scripture, because many of the ideals that professed in the Declaration of Independence, such as equality for all men, like, contribute, like, we pledge to each other our lives, our wealth, our freedom. And so, moving to the Declaration in its original context, it was not exactly moved in its purest form. And so it wasn't as much American scripture as we could perhaps see today, as Sam elaborated on before.
I believe that is seen as American scripture because we look at the Revolutionary War, how hard we fought to gain our independence as a country. And we're like, what were we fighting over? We were fighting over the ideals that were professed in our Declaration of Independence. So we can look back at that and say, this is what really spawned us to become a country. So that's how that's why I feel that we can look at that now as our American scripture, because that is one of the main documents that led to our independence as a country, the great nation that we live today.
You spoke about how human rights is being part of the Declaration of Independence. Do you think human rights in the United States is where it should be?
In some certain aspects. Today, it is really moving in a positive direction with immigration reforms and that we're seeing that we're including everybody in our country under our law. However, we still see in southern states, and especially in Colorado in the 90s, we're still debating with anti-homosexual legislation where we don't.
You can
You
finish.
finish.
Where it is not exactly equality for all people, especially when the legislators are acting on their whims and their passions. They might neglect some minorities, such as homosexuals and immigrants.
Let's give them a hand.
So I'm gonna give you a little feedback and talk about what it is. I thought your presentation was well put together. You answered the questions, you did the research, you clearly are the most knowledgeable group of people in the room with respect to this topic. And it came across. It's one of the, well.
Except for all of the other.
I haven't spoken to Devin or committee the other. When you are in that position, you have to make certain that that you use that to your greatest benefit, and I thought that you did. You were confident, your presentation was well put together, you hit all the topics, you brought in some new information to some of the questions, going further back in research, and you don't go much further than Aristotle before you start stumbling around. You did a really good job, and it was a positive experience for the judges.
I thought you guys were fantastic. You had an argument, like you had a thesis to your presentation, which is, this is both an old document and a new one. And I loved how you cited Egypt. I loved how you talked about, you brought in like evidence. You actually brought in evidence, and that's kind of the first time that I've seen that today. Because I think that these ideas can be very abstract and sort of hard to hang on to. And you guys were all excellent speakers. I would recommend, I think you are more than capable of getting more memorized and standing up. And a good way to do that is kind of giving yourself cue cards and doing like just cutting down exactly what is on them until it's a couple words just to jog your memory. So it's more of a safety blanket than anything else. But you guys were fantastic, great speakers, very knowledgeable. It was really, really fun to watch.
I've been doing this a long time, and I can say, wow. You brought in things that I wanted to hear, how you can translate what is happening in today's world with the Declaration of Independence. And I love how you brought in the Egypt, and then when you went back to ancient times, Cicero, and it just was phenomenal. You had such knowledge that it just blew me away. That's what we want to hear. You answered this question too. This is what we wanted to hear. You answered it. I love the piece, because I was going to ask you about that Well County and all of the other ones trying to separate out. That's a big issue. As you said, this document is revolutionary. We are still growing. We're only so many years old in the United States. And you made me recognize that again. Good job. It just flowed smoothly. You knew your stuff. You kept your eye contact with us. I love that. Very well dressed. That is important. Your whole picture of what you did was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much.